Okay, I'll just start off the question. There are points in the script and in the film that overlap with your personal life to some extent.
Yes.
How did that change the way you prepared for the role, if at all?
Well, we had many long conversations about my life as what I would describe at that point. I consider myself a garden variety cross-dresser. And that's how I take the character of Henry. Someone who is married, although you don't see that in the script now, but in an earlier iteration that was clear, who would rather have died than have anybody see him do this. And then coming to work many, many years, all those years, in the 70s, to an office and developing a very intimate, wonderful friendship with someone his own age, and eventually his life he was able to express it, and then could cross-dress in the office. So much of that experience reflected my own personal experience.
I remember reading the script early on, and at that point it was about it was all heterosexual.
Right.
So it made a big change, and I'm wondering, a question for you, how it came from one place, how it evolved.
The original script was based on a job I once had, probably 35, 40 years ago, in city government, in a very kind of dark, unpleasant, bureaucratic office in city government. And in that office were a man and a woman who worked at desks just like that opposite each other. They were probably in their late 70s, early 80s, and they had this incredible platonic relationship, which brightened the whole place up, even though the rest of it was dingy, drab, old desks, no computers at that time. And I just, that idea stuck with me, the idea of these two people having a bond and bringing light to a place that was otherwise dark and dingy, stuck with me for 30 or 40 years for whatever reason. So I wrote it that way. And then somehow...
But in the original script, Henry dies, is that correct?
In the original script, Henry dies. And they're both heterosexual, but it's platonic, completely platonic. And then it just occurred to me, after knowing Richard for 10 years, I guess, longer, and having many conversations about cross-dressing, that that would, to add that element would be a way to enhance what was going on in that office. That's the best way I can put it.
Hen, the character, when you first started at your job, which I believe it was in the 70s?
Yes.
At the office. Right when you entered your job, were you already cross-dressing, or did you have to wait, not wait a while, but it was so frowned upon back in the 70s, were you worried about repercussions or being fired, or, your character?
Yes, that would have been completely and totally out of the question. This character, like many, many actual real-life heterosexual men who need to represent themselves as women, for whatever the reason may be, would have probably had a trunk or a suitcase with women's clothes in the basement. And when he was safe, felt that he was completely alone, would not be discovered, would be able to dress up and sort of look at himself in the mirror and so forth. But coming to work in an office like that and realizing that he has a Samba partner there, and that the truth came out, it made it easy for him to finally be able to present in front of another human being. And that was an immense step for a person like that.
So Todd,
Yeah.
This is your second film. Can you talk a little bit about that transition from the first film to this film? Do you see continuity and themes between those two?
Yeah, I actually didn't see continuity myself, but somebody did point out that that I have in both films. The first one was called Pianoforte. I didn't direct it; I wrote it and produced it. There's a theme in both of them of a person or people having kind of a cocoon-like place where they can express themselves, and then the outside world where they can't necessarily express themselves. So that, if I had to point to a particular theme, that would be it. Yeah, the other question that came up, I don't know if you want to respond to this, is Henry trans? Do you have any thought about that?
I do.
Yeah.
To say someone is transgendered, which simply means crossing gender boundaries, so forth, whatever that may be. Cross-dressing. Whew, boy, we have a lot of stuff that we can talk about. Cross-dressing is generally thought of as something that largely heterosexual men do to express whatever it is that needs to come out. And I think that that is the territory that Henry occupies. And to be able to then come out onto the street, go down to probably the coffee shop on the corner and, like, you know, ask for coffee like this. It's all a matter of he is who he is and does not think of himself, I'm sure. I don't think the character of Henry would think of himself as being trans in the modern sense. That is, thinking that he is a woman trapped in a man's body, or wants the last thing people want to do is present as non-binary, because it's neither here, it's neither there, and difficult for most people to take in.
Do you want to talk about some of the stuff that was left on the cutting room floor?
There were a couple of references to Henry's wife and the fact that she didn't necessarily go along with this cross-dressing. I left it vague in the original, well, not just in the script, we filmed it that way. So there was this conversation between Dolores and Henry about his wife. You don't really know if she's still alive, if they're still together, but just to kind of, she talked the talk but wouldn't allow him to walk the walk, his cross-dressing walk, so to speak. That was until quite recently, until a few weeks ago, actually. And it seemed like an unnecessary complication. We cut almost 2 minutes off the film. So.
Why does it take Dolores' death to catalyze Henry appearing on the street in women's clothing and cross-dressing in public?
Well, for me it was a matter of her essence being distilled into an unexplainable moment that moves him so. That, I mean, frankly, it took the death of my first wife for me to be able to get a grip on who I was and the urgency of expressing it. I remember thinking, that if I don't open the closet door and look at it, I'll be the next one on a gurney. So I would say that's really what's at base of that for me, was cataclysmic. This is the end, my friend. What are you going to do?
If not now, when?
Yes, if not now, when? Thank you.
Joe, did you want to say anything about the editing process in terms of shortening it? Or?
It's pretty typical, though. I mean, films usually start out very long, and it's always a question of trying to find the film, the structure of the film, and the most expedient way to tell the story. And that's what happened, like all films, that's what happened with Old Hen. A year ago in January, we mixed it,
Right.
and we're still doing changes. So it's always it's just tweaking it, reinforcing it, and finding a narrative, and telling it in the cleanest way possible.
I think one dimension that hasn't been spoken about that really moved me very, very deeply is the dimension of loneliness going in old age, and guys sort of using this kind of humor and bravado to conceal really an deep inner loneliness. I think the eyes really, you said it very, very well.
There's two major themes, really.
Yeah.
Isolation, loneliness,
Yeah,
and exacerbated by.
Yeah. But you do it really so well. I really commend you. It's terrific.
Yeah, really.
Thank you all for coming.